Welcome to Warriors of the World. Today we'll be exploring the extraordinary story of Roy Benavidez, whose heroic actions during the Vietnam War stand as one of the most remarkable displays of courage in military history. Subscribe now to join our community and support this project. Now, let's begin. Born on August 5, 1945 in Cuero, Texas to a Mexican-American farmer and a Yaqui Indian mother, Roy Benavidez was orphaned by age 7. Raised by his uncle and aunt in El Campo, Texas, young Roy experienced the harsh realities of poverty and discrimination that affected many Mexican Americans in the Southwest during the 1940s and 50s. These challenges led to his dropping out of school in the 7th grade, a decision that might have condemned others to limited prospects. At age 19, following a brief period as an agricultural laborer, Benavidez enlisted in the Texas Army National Guard in 1955 and transferred to the regular Army in 1959. He initially served with the 82nd Airborne Division, where he completed paratrooper training and distinguished himself through physical fitness and attention to tactical detail. His superiors noted his exceptional determination during training exercises, a quality that would later prove decisive in combat situations. In 1963, responding to President Kennedy's expanded emphasis on special warfare capabilities, Benavidez volunteered for the Army Special Forces, commonly known as the Green Berets. The selection process eliminated approximately 70% of applicants through a grueling assessment of physical endurance, tactical problem-solving, and psychological resilience. Benavidez's successful completion of this training marked him as belonging to an elite cadre specifically prepared for unconventional warfare behind enemy lines. His graduation from Special Forces training in 1965 coincided with the dramatic escalation of American involvement in Vietnam. Within months of earning his Green Beret, Benavidez would be deployed to a conflict that would ultimately reveal the full measure of his exceptional courage. Roy Benavidez arrived in Vietnam in 1965 as part of the rapidly expanding American presence in Southeast Asia. Assigned to an advisory team with the 5th Special Forces Group, he joined the distinctive mission profile that separated Special Forces from conventional military units. During this first tour, Benavidez operated primarily in the Central Highlands, working closely with Montagnard tribesmen, training these indigenous fighters while conducting intelligence gathering on enemy movements through the mountainous jungle terrain. The defining moment of this deployment came during a patrol near the Cambodian border in 1965. As recounted by Benavidez himself in later congressional testimony, his team was conducting reconnaissance when they triggered an enemy ambush. In the ensuing firefight, Benavidez stepped on a landmine, the explosion sending metal fragments tearing through his body. Medical records document extensive injuries to his back and legs, with significant nerve damage that initially paralyzed both limbs. Evacuated to military hospitals first in Vietnam and then to Fort Sam Houston in Texas, Benavidez faced a devastating prognosis. Military doctors informed him that his injuries would likely prevent him from ever walking again. The Medical Evaluation Board recommended a medical discharge from active duty, effectively ending his military career at age 30. What followed demonstrated the extraordinary determination that would later define Benavidez's most heroic actions. Against medical advice and hospital regulations, he began a self-imposed rehabilitation program after hours. Former ward nurse Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez described how Benavidez would drag himself to the wall each night after staff had left, using it for support as he forced his damaged legs to bear weight. Beginning with excruciating movements measured in inches, he gradually rebuilt his ability to stand and eventually walk, often biting a towel to prevent screaming from the pain. After months of this punishing self-rehabilitation, Benavidez famously demonstrated his recovery by walking out of the hospital unassisted, directly contradicting the medical board's assessment. Despite having technically recovered, Benavidez still faced significant opposition to returning to active duty status. However, as Vietnam operations intensified and the need for experienced Special Forces operators grew, Benavidez successfully petitioned for reinstatement to full duty status. By 1967, against all medical expectations and military protocols, Benavidez had secured reassignment to Vietnam, rejoining the 5th Special Forces Group as operations expanded dramatically across the country. His return represented not just a personal triumph over devastating injury but demonstrated the extraordinary commitment that would soon be tested in one of the most intense combat scenarios of the entire Vietnam conflict. When Roy Benavidez returned to Vietnam, he was assigned to Detachment B-56, 5th Special Forces Group, operating from Forward Base Loc Ninh near the Cambodian border. This unit's primary mission involved conducting classified reconnaissance operations as part of MACVSOG, sending small teams into denied areas to gather intelligence on North Vietnamese army movements. The events of May 13, 1968 would later be described by General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, as a feat of almost superhuman courage. That morning, an urgent radio call came from a 12-man reconnaissance team operating in Cambodia. The transmission indicated the team had discovered a major North Vietnamese army troop concentration but had been compromised and was now surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces. Initial extraction attempts by helicopter had been driven off by intense ground fire, and the team reported multiple casualties while remaining under constant attack. As Benavidez later recounted, he was monitoring the radio transmissions when he heard the desperate calls from the surrounded team. Though not officially assigned to the extraction response, he grabbed his medical bag and sidearm and ran to the helicopter landing zone where the backup extraction flight was preparing to depart. According to the helicopter pilot's after-action report, Benavidez arrived carrying only a medical kit and knife, insisting on joining the mission despite not being on the manifest. As the helicopter hovered approximately 10 feet above the clearing, unable to land due to enemy fire, Benavidez made the decision to jump from the aircraft carrying only his medical bag and a knife. Helicopter door gunner specialist Eric Davis later testified that immediately upon hitting the ground, Benavidez was wounded by both small arms fire and grenade fragments, sustaining injuries to his face and back. Despite these initial wounds, he proceeded through intense enemy fire toward the position of the surrounded reconnaissance team approximately 75 yards away. Before reaching the team, Benavidez was wounded again, this time taking a bullet through his right leg. Upon reaching the team's position, he found 4 dead American soldiers and 4 critically wounded, along with 2 wounded Vietnamese interpreters. The team leader had been killed, creating a leadership vacuum in the midst of the ongoing enemy assault. Recognizing the critical nature of the situation, Benavidez took command, administering emergency medical treatment to the wounded while simultaneously organizing a defensive perimeter and calling in tactical air support. Radio logs record Benavidez calmly requesting airstrikes within 50 meters of their position, danger close coordinates that reflected the desperate nature of their situation. Over the next several hours, Benavidez made multiple trips outside the defensive perimeter to recover dead and wounded personnel scattered during the initial contact. During one such excursion, Benavidez was confronted by an enemy soldier at close range. Having expended his ammunition, Benavidez engaged in hand-to-hand combat, using his knife to eliminate the threat but sustaining additional wounds in the process. Throughout this period, Benavidez coordinated the arrival of multiple extraction helicopters, each of which took devastating fire while attempting to land. The third helicopter managed to touch down briefly, allowing Benavidez to begin loading the wounded. During this process, Benavidez was wounded again by small arms fire to his abdomen and grenade fragments to his back. Despite these injuries, he continued loading wounded personnel and recovered classified documents from the bodies of the dead team members. As the extraction helicopter lifted off, it was hit by enemy fire and crashed approximately 50 meters from the landing zone. Benavidez, despite his multiple wounds, helped survivors from the wreckage and organized another defensive position while calling for additional air support. Air Force records indicate that tactical aircraft delivered over 30 tons of ordnance around the embattled position during this period, with some strikes coming within 30 meters of friendly forces. A final extraction helicopter eventually landed, and Benavidez again organized the loading of casualties, prioritizing the wounded over the dead. As the last survivor was being loaded, Benavidez was attacked from behind by an enemy soldier. In the ensuing hand-to-hand struggle, Benavidez was stabbed multiple times with a bayonet. Though severely wounded, he managed to kill his attacker before finally being pulled aboard the departing helicopter. In total, Benavidez had spent approximately 6 hours in nearly continuous combat. Upon reaching the base camp, medical personnel initially believed Benavidez was dead. According to medical technician Brian Williams, who was present during the triage, Benavidez had no discernible pulse and was placed in a body bag. It was only when a doctor was preparing to zip the bag closed that Benavidez, summoning his last reserves of energy, spat in the doctor's face to prove he was still alive. This final act of defiance saved him from being mistakenly declared deceased. The medical assessment of Roy Benavidez's condition following the May 13 operation presented an unprecedented catalog of combat trauma. According to hospital records, Benavidez arrived with 7 major gunshot wounds, 28 puncture wounds from shrapnel, and extensive bayonet injuries including a deep abdominal wound that had exposed intestinal tissue. Medical Director Colonel James Hayes later commented that the injuries represented the most extensive combination of trauma I witnessed in 27 years of military medicine. The initial surgical intervention lasted over 9 hours as medical teams worked to control hemorrhaging, remove foreign objects, and stabilize damage to vital organs. Benavidez received transfusions totaling more than 5 units of blood, effectively replacing his entire blood volume during the initial treatment phase. His condition remained critical for 72 hours, during which time he was technically considered clinically dead on 2 separate occasions before being resuscitated. After stabilization, Benavidez was transferred to Japan and then to Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston, where he would spend almost a year in recovery. The medical prognosis initially suggested he would never walk unassisted again, though as he had following his previous injury, Benavidez defied medical expectations through sheer determination. The psychological impact of such intense combat experiences typically manifests in significant post-traumatic symptoms. Military psychologist Dr. William Peterson, who evaluated Benavidez during his recovery, noted the absence of typical combat stress reactions, writing that Benavidez displayed an almost preternatural psychological resilience that defies standard clinical explanation. When questioned about this unusual psychological fortitude, Benavidez reportedly attributed it to his childhood hardships and his deep religious faith. Beyond the physical and psychological recovery, Benavidez faced significant bureaucratic challenges regarding recognition of his actions. Although his commanders had initiated paperwork for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, the classified nature of cross-border operations into Cambodia complicated the process. As a result, Benavidez initially received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1969, the nation's second highest military decoration. Despite the extraordinary nature of his sacrifices, Benavidez returned to active duty after his recovery, serving with Special Forces training units until his medical retirement in 1976. Military personnel records indicate that even during this final phase of his service, Benavidez volunteered for additional deployments to Vietnam, requests that were denied based on medical restrictions. The full recognition of Roy Benavidez's extraordinary heroism would require an administratively complex and politically challenging 13-year journey. The initial obstacle involved the classified nature of operations in Cambodia, where the action had taken place. Cross-border operations remained officially unacknowledged by the United States government until 1970, meaning that actions in these areas could not be officially documented in award submissions. The process to properly recognize Benavidez began gaining momentum in 1973 when former team member specialist Wesley Allers, recovered from his own wounds, filed a detailed sworn statement about Benavidez's actions. This was followed by similar documentation from helicopter pilot Captain Daniel Kelly in 1975, providing the minimum 2 eyewitness accounts required for Medal of Honor consideration. However, the statements initially disappeared within the military bureaucracy, reportedly misplaced during the post-Vietnam reduction in military administrative personnel. A significant breakthrough came in 1979 when General John Vesey was reading The Great Raid, a newly published book about Special Forces operations, and encountered the detailed account of Benavidez's actions. Recognizing that the described conduct clearly merited the nation's highest military decoration, Vesey initiated a formal inquiry into why Benavidez had received only the Distinguished Service Cross. This high-level attention effectively cut through the administrative barriers that had previously stalled the case. The formal review process moved forward with remarkable speed. The Army Awards Board convened a special panel in 1980 to evaluate the accumulated evidence, including newly discovered medical records that corroborated the extraordinary nature of Benavidez's wounds. The board's unanimous recommendation to upgrade the award to the Medal of Honor was rapidly approved and forwarded to the Department of Defense for final review. On February 24, 1981, President Ronald Reagan presented the Medal of Honor to Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez in a White House ceremony. The official citation summarized his actions. His fearless personal leadership, tenacious devotion to duty, and extremely valorous actions in the face of overwhelming odds were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect the utmost credit on him and the United States Army. Reagan himself went beyond the formal language of the citation, commenting during the ceremony that, if the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it. This recognition, though delayed by 13 years, represented the complete institutional acknowledgement of Benavidez's extraordinary courage under fire. The Medal of Honor brought Benavidez significant public attention, which he leveraged to advance causes important to him. He became an active speaker at schools, particularly in disadvantaged communities, sharing his journey from childhood poverty to military distinction. Educational researcher Dr. Carlos Martinez documented statistically significant increases in military recruitment among Hispanic Americans in regions where Benavidez conducted speaking engagements. Benavidez also became an outspoken advocate for Veterans Affairs reform, testifying before Congress regarding the challenges faced by Vietnam veterans. During one particularly dramatic congressional hearing in 1983 regarding proposed cuts to veterans' disability benefits, Benavidez silenced the hearing room by opening his shirt to reveal his extensive scars, asking, "Are these the types of sacrifices you want to cut support for?" The proposed legislation was subsequently withdrawn. In his later years, Benavidez authored two autobiographical works, The Three Wars of Roy Benavidez and Medal of Honor, a Vietnam warrior's story, which provided detailed first-hand accounts of his experiences. He continued his public speaking until his health deteriorated due to complications from diabetes, a condition his physicians linked to Agent Orange exposure during his Vietnam service. Roy Benavidez died on November 29, 1998, at age 63 and was buried with full military honors at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery. His legacy continues through multiple military recognitions, including the USNS Benavidez, a military sealift command ship, the Roy P. Benavidez Elementary School in Houston, Texas, and the Master Sergeant Roy P. Benavidez Special Operations Logistic Complex at Fort Bragg. Perhaps most significantly, his story has become standard instructional material at the U.S. Army Special Forces Qualification Course, where new generations of Green Berets study his actions as the ultimate example of the Special Forces ethos of courage, resourcefulness, and selfless service. The life of Roy Benavidez offers powerful lessons about human potential and sacrificial service. From disadvantaged beginnings marked by poverty, discrimination, and limited education, he rose to exemplify the highest ideals of military valor. His refusal to surrender to devastating injuries, not once but twice, demonstrates extraordinary resilience. His willingness to risk everything to save his comrades, despite facing overwhelming odds, reflects a depth of character that transcends normal human limitations. In many ways, the story of Roy Benavidez represents the quintessential American journey, from marginalized immigrant origins to national hero. Yet his legacy extends beyond American borders, serving as a universal example of how courage, determination, and selflessness can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. For military professionals worldwide, his actions on May 13, 1968 stand as an enduring benchmark of what is possible in the most extreme circumstances. Subscribe now, become a member, turn on notifications, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment so we can compare our knowledge and sources. Thank you for following our channel. Until our next strategic journey, here at Warriors of the World.